Hello, everyone, and welcome to Communication Connection. I'm your host, Terry Likes. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a guest today who is an alumna, and she has a background in public relations and journalism and a lifetime of telling stories. Please welcome alumna Lynn Oldshue. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us here on Communication Connection.
Hey, Terry, thank you for having me. It's good to come back to your school and be able to be on this side. It means you've done something. So
Well,
it's a
you
big deal.
graduated in 1991 with a degree in public relations, so at least welcome back virtually to the campus today. I know you have a son who is a history major on campus, so we'd love to connect with you on campus in the future. But you went on to get a master's degree from Alabama, and you currently reside in Fairhope, Alabama, so a very pretty part of the country. But what brought you to Mississippi State back in the late 80s, early 90s?
There wasn't even a choice. My dad went to state, and then I grew up going to all the football games and Marty McDowell, and went to band camp there at every camp I could go to. And I didn't even apply anywhere else. That wasn't even an option. So it's interesting watching my kids go through the process of figuring out their life. Like, I knew from the very beginning that, Mississippi State was it home. And so, yeah. And I may have gotten a master's from another school, but we joke about it, but that doesn't count. It's just undergrad. So, yeah.
Well, during your time on campus, a job that I've always thought would be a lot of fun is to be a Roadrunner on campus. And for those who don't know, it's basically a student campus tour guide, taking prospective students and their families around looking at all the sites and particular points of interest on campus. That had to have been a lot of fun while you were in school.
Yeah, it was. So my whole life, I was a baton twirler and dreamed of being a feature twirler for Mississippi State. And that didn't happen and kind of crushed my dreams. And then started thinking about becoming a Roadrunner. And it is the people you're around. But Jimmy Abraham there's his picture at the bowling alley, which is my mentor. And the very first day he had us all meeting there, and he slammed his ring on the podium to get our attention. And he said, the most important person is the one in front of you. There's no other more important job than dealing with the life of someone else. And evidently that ring and pounded podium tattooed it on my head, because that was it. I think that's kind of how I lived my life ever since. And eye contact. He was always drilling you about eye contact. So Roadrunner shaped me probably more than anything else at Mississippi State. And just to have those positive experiences and to keep caring about people.
Well, if many people are probably like me, we have no idea who our commencement speaker was years ago, but you had share an experience, I guess, with several hundred alumni, and that John Grisham was your commencement speaker. Many know the ties that he has to the university, but certainly one that stands out for you.
Yeah, so I think he said it was going to be the shortest commencement speech ever, which probably it was. But he had majored in accounting at Mississippi State, and of course went on a law degree and then became a writer. But he said, whatever you're majoring in today is not going to be who you're gonna become. So give yourself the space and the chance to follow all your paths and to figure it out. And that's so true. At the time, I didn't really know what I was going to do and where it was going to go. But I always look back on that of give yourself a chance to figure it out, because it's going to go a whole bunch of different directions before it gets to where you're supposed to be. And I proved him true. So.
Well, I'd say so,
Yeah,
because your background in public relations, but you've worked for many years as a journalist. You've worn a lot of hats, and we'll talk about those. But he's certainly true, and that's a story that we share with students today. And that rare is it today that someone works in a career path for 40 years. People tend to move around more and do different things. And certainly in your current role, you are working for Alabama Public Radio as the Gulf Coast correspondent. Tell us more about that.
I love Alabama Public Radio, NPR. Never would have dreamed to get to do this, but I started my own little podcast, Beyond the Byline, because as a journalist, I started realizing the most interesting stories are what happens in the reporting, and how many journalists have all these stories and don't get to tell what really happened. And I love that of listening to any journalist talk about their process. So I started a Beyond the Bylines podcast and started bringing journalists together to talk about the stories and how they told them, and interviewed Pat Duggins for his story about sex trafficking. And I just done a series on that. And before it was over, he said, why don't you come work for us? Absolutely. And I've been there ever since, and he's phenomenal to work for. It's weird here. I'm still weird hearing my voice on the radio, and I try not to listen too much, but I love it. It's just one more way of storytelling.
Well, and multimedia storytelling in today's world, and you also do some work for a newspaper down there. Tell us about those experiences.
So Lanyap is an alternative paper. They have been around 20 years now, and they have done a great job of filling in the gap. The Mobile Press Register, they kind of cut staff, and as local journalism and newspapers go, they kind of keep diminishing. But Lanyap has stepped in, filled in the gap, and so I get to be a freelance writer and cover the hard stories. And like I've been working on a series about drugs and fentanyl and overdoses and women addiction for a year. And I just get to go deep and broad and have a home for those. And so Lanyap has really done a great job of filling in gaps for local journalism and just letting me do what I want to do.
Well, it's great that you have that flexibility in your job and within your storytelling, and you also are able to do something that I know is near and dear to your heart, and that's telling stories of those from around the South and around the world in something called Our Southern Souls.
Our Southern Souls, I get teary and even thinking about it. And so I basically walk up to strangers and tell their stories. It started now almost 7 years ago. I did stories on the bus riders in Mobile with a friend of mine who's a photographer. And he had did pictures of the homeless. And I did his story. And the homeless wasn't on my radar. There was so much that wasn't on my radar. And he opened my eyes. And after you start seeing things, you can't look away and you can't unsee it. So we rode the bus in Mobile for weeks, or I did for months, telling stories of bus riders. And the buses look like these rolling billboards for personal injury lawyers, and you never pay attention who's on the inside. And I thought they were going to reject me. I thought they would never let this 6-foot-tall, reddish-haired white woman step on the bus and talk. And that's when I learned all the walls are mine, that I was rejecting them before they'd ever reject me. And that's so far from the truth. I mean, they scoot over and tell their stories about going to dialysis or chemo or to work or to, they go grocery shopping and could only carry on what they could hold in their hands. These incredible life stories. And they were so thankful to have someone listen and who cared. I mean, it didn't matter who I was. It was just, I was there listening, and they got to tell what their life was like. And my husband gave me the book Humans of New York and said, this is what you should do in the South. I think I've done 2,000 interviews in the book. And next week is one of my favorite. I love doing Mississippi Week. I've been doing, the last couple of months, I've been doing stories in Mississippi. And next week they'll run on Mississippi Week. And a couple of them are from Mississippi State. So.
Well, that's great. I know that when I was in the radio and television industry, I usually had what's called a daily turn, meaning I would get a story idea in the morning and I had to have it completed by that afternoon. So you've certainly had the flexibility, and most people don't understand that to do some real in-depth reporting, it takes a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of interviewing, and as you have said, that can take months. So is there a favorite story? You've mentioned several, but is there a favorite story over time you'd like to share with us?
Well, you just mentioned that about in-depth. Like, I learned this term 2 months ago, and I'm reading a book about intuitive journalism. And I'll way over report for months. I mean, I will go so far and so deep just so I can understand and make sure there's no stone left unturned. And I will go talk to as many people to understand, collect all the data points I can. But I've learned that's intuitive journalism and writing from the heart, because I like to write close to pain, take complicated issues like drugs or sex trafficking or domestic violence and explain it in new ways and write from the pain. And right now I'm just doing these stories about fentanyl and overdoses and drugs. I had very little clue about this until I was in Jackson at Shower Power in January and met a man who was volunteering there. And his son, Austin, had died. He was from Madison and had died from an overdose. It was carfentanil. He was taking an Oxycontin. It was carfentanil. And his dad, to help through the pain, he would volunteer at Shower Power, made best friends with a homeless guy there. And that totally opened my eyes to this world. And my kids are close to that age. It scared me to death. And just became this whole open door to a whole new world. And right now, I'm writing about women and addiction. And before, how judgmental was I about women who had lost their kids because they were in addiction? Like, I always thought, why can't you get out of it? Just stop. And it's not that. It's substance use disorder. It's so much more complicated. So to get it out, so complicated. It is. I love the stories that open my eyes, show where I was wrong, change my thinking. Because if I've changed, then maybe someone else who reads it changed. And it's also giving dignity and understanding to people who are in really hard circumstances.
Well, telling impactful stories and educating the audience certainly very important. And I know the communication degree from Mississippi State has been very important for you. Tell us about the impact it has had on your career.
Yeah, so I majored in PR. I should have gone into journalism, but my family owned the newspapers in Mississippi, and my granddad was still alive, and I was just scared of being a failure and tarnishing the family name or something. So went into PR and got involved in all the activities because of that. I did an internship at Opryland, and there were two other girls so much sharper than I was. And I realized it was so like Mississippi State's so great about pushing out internships. And part of that is learning, I think, also where your weaknesses are. So I came back to state and was a little bit more dedicated in learning, but also got involved with Campus Activities Board and became better, more focused about activities. And that's what I love about Mississippi State is I think I developed so much more as a person and could go out in the world and, like John Grisham said, and go out and do anything. Because there's a lot of opportunities in a small school like State, and I got to take advantage of a lot of them. I wrote for the Reflector. I don't know if I would have had those opportunities other places.
Well, you certainly followed John Grisham's advice. Lynn, we've got about 30 seconds left. What advice would you share with students if we're able to share this message in classes today?
There are so many other ways, like in class, there's so many other ways I didn't understand about writing, about journalism. You get to go figure out your own. That's the exciting part. It's just going to take you experimenting, and there's a bunch of different paths to get to really great places and make a difference.
Well, Lynn, we greatly appreciate having you here on Communication Connection. We enjoyed hearing about all of your stories and your storytelling. Congratulations on all of your success. We welcome you back to campus the next time you're here with your son, who's a history major here on campus. So thank you for your time today, and thank you for watching us here on Communication Connection. I'm Terry Likes. We'll see you next time.